Though it had many faults, the search for the truth by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was the best way for South Africa to begin the process of healing from the harsh discrimination of apartheid.
Never, never, and never again shall it be that this beautiful land will again experience the oppression of one by another and suffer the indignity of being the skunk of the world. The sun shall never set on so glorious a human achievement. Let freedom reign. God bless Africa. I thank you.
Nelson Mandela's inauguration was one of the most momentous days in South Africa's history. He spoke of a new era for South Africa and a break from its apartheid past. However, its past still needed to be dealt with, a past of immense prejudice of South Africa's majority population. Since their freedoms and territory were curtailed by the arrival of the British in the early 19th century, Afrikaners, who were the white Dutch descendants living in South Africa, had long sought their own political and cultural autonomy. After the defeat of the Afrikaners at the hands of the British in the Boer War at the turn of the 20th century, Afrikaner nationalism surged, culminating in the election of D.F. Malan, who ushered in the policy of apartheid.
The color question is rapidly increasing in seriousness and urgency. I consider apartheid, that's the separation policy, to be South Africa's last chance to remain a white man's country.
The Afrikaners thought it was their duty to civilize South Africa and help the blacks achieve their own fulfillments, though separately from that of whites. Though the African National Congress, the ANC, later to be led by Nelson Mandela in the 1960s, was founded in 1912 to protect black interests. The legislation that would then follow over the next several decades would severely restrict the rights of black South Africans, pushing the country towards the brink of disaster. From 1910 on, having conquered the indigenous inhabitants of South Africa, the whites enacted a series of laws to control the blacks. One of the first of these laws were the Pass Laws, which helped limit land ownership for blacks, and later the Group Area Act of 1950 restricted them to living and working on Bantu homelands, which restricted 70% of the population to just 13% of the land. Later acts include the Separate Amenities Act, which legalized separate and unequal public facilities for the races. Other acts prohibited interracial marriage, enabled the police to apply excessive, sometimes brutal power, and also denied many children a remotely proper education. No one cause explains why apartheid began to fall apart. However, several social, economic, and political occurrences and events conspired to weaken its grip. The restrictions imposed by the nationalists in the 1950s led to increasing unrest, including the 1960 Sharpeville protest against the Pass Laws, which left 67 dead, and the 1976 Soweto riots, which left over 500 dead. By the late 1970s, the South African economy was growing significantly weaker. Besides the extreme cost of maintaining separate apartheid controls for each group, businesses in South Africa were not able to export their goods, overseas capital investments in South Africa were greatly reduced, and by 1977, for the first time, more skilled workers and professionals were leaving South Africa than were emigrating to the country. This, along with the continued corruption and unemployment in the black homelands, further fueled unrest as the surge of blacks sought employment in the already overcrowded and unhealthy urban centers. Foreign Minister Pik Botha compared the blacks and whites of South Africa to a zebra. If the zebra were shot, it would not matter whether the bullet penetrated a white stripe or a black stripe, the whole animal would die. This exemplifies how economically dependent the blacks and whites of South Africa were on each other. Afrikaners decided they were simply not willing to pay for the price of their prejudices. After several protests in 1989, F.W. de Klerk, a man 20 years younger than his predecessor P.W. Botha and far more responsive to the forces of change, became president. De Klerk then unbanned the African National Congress and other anti-apartheid groups that had long been illegal in South Africa, and just a few days later released Mandela and other ANC leaders after nearly 3 decades of imprisonment. After 3 years of negotiation, de Klerk and Mandela agreed on an interim constitution, which led to an interim multi-party government that began to operate at the end of 1993. In May of 1994, Nelson Mandela was elected president. Even after changing South Africa as promised and instituting democracy, Mandela still was determined to deal with South Africa's violent past. He explained that human rights violations should be investigated by a truth commission, not for revenge, but to help provide accountability of past injustices and atrocities, and to begin the process of national reconciliation between the races. Many different ideas were considered before Parliament passed the Promotion of National Unity and Reconciliation Act, establishing the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in 1995.